The city, a sprawling bruise under the fading stars, was a symphony of distant wails and the ceaseless hum of forgotten machinery. My office, a forgotten alcove on the third floor of a brick relic, offered a panoramic view of this sprawling melancholy. Dust motes danced in the anemic glow of my desk lamp, each particle a tiny, fleeting universe, much like the cases that drifted through my door, small, insignificant, yet demanding their brief moment of gravity. I, UserRH, once a cog in the grand clockwork of justice, now merely observed its erratic ticking from the periphery, a self-exiled prophet of the overlooked. A half-empty tumbler of something amber caught the light, its contents a bitter companion to the quiet erosion of my reputation. The ghost of a past case, a phantom limb of my former life, still throbbed with an insistent ache, a constant reminder of the precipice I'd tumbled from. It was a wound that refused to scar, an open invitation for doubt to fester. Every new dawn was just another layer of ash on the embers of ambition. The shrill clamor of my ancient flip phone, a relic itself, shattered the fragile peace. It was an unwelcome intrusion, a discordant note in my carefully constructed silence. I eyed it with the suspicion one reserves for a coiled viper, knowing that calls at this hour rarely brought tidings of comfort. The name flashing on the screen was familiar, a ghost from my former life, a man I'd shared trenches with before my fall from grace, the lead detective. I hesitated, the amber liquid swirling in my glass, reflecting the flicker of a nascent curiosity I'd sworn to extinguish. What fresh hell? I rasped, my voice a gravel road after a long drought. His voice, usually a booming command, was now a low, urgent murmur. UserRH, I seen the news. I hadn't. News was for the naive, for those who still believed in a grand narrative of truth and consequence. My truth was far grimmer. I make my own news, detective, or rather, I watch the world burn from a safe distance. Elias Thorne, he said, the name a blunt instrument. Dead, he was found at the shipping container terminal at dawn. The name hit me like a splash of ice water. Elias Thorne, the tech titan, the visionary who promised to reshape our digital existence, whose face graced every magazine cover, beloved, untouchable, immortal in the public eye. His demise wasn't just a headline, it was a seismic tremor. Thorne, I repeated, the cynicism momentarily eclipsed by a genuine jolt. How? Natural causes. Bullet to the head, the detective stated, his voice devoid of emotion, a professional mask firmly in place. Execution style, clean, no witnesses, no struggle, and at the terminal, that's not his usual stomping ground. My mind, despite its self-imposed retirement, began to stir, a dormant engine sputtering to life. Elias Thorne, found dead in the industrial mall of the city, far from his gilded towers. It smelled wrong. It tasted of something far more complex than a random act of violence. Why call me? I asked, my tone sharp, though a part of me already knew the answer. He wouldn't reach out unless he was truly at a dead end, or if he sensed something deeper, something that required a certain unorthodox perspective, my perspective. Because I see things, UserRH, he confessed, a rare admission of vulnerability. Things the rest of us miss, and this feels like one of yours. Too neat, too precise for a street hit, too messy for anything else. They want I there, unofficial, just to look. They, the unnamed powers that always pulled the strings. Even in disgrace, my name still carried a certain weight, a certain notoriety. A grim chuckle escaped me. So the prodigal outcast returns to the scene of the crime, for a moment at least. Just come, UserRH, he urged. It's already a circus. The brass is breathing down our necks. The mayor's on the phone every 5 minutes. This isn't going to be easy. I hung up without another word, the click a stark punctuation mark in the lingering silence. Yet the image of Elias Thorne, the untouchable, laid low in a desolate corner of the city, sparked an ember of the old fire. A puzzle. And I, for all my cynicism, had always been drawn to puzzles. The drive was a blur of pre-dawn streets, the city slowly shedding its cloak of night. When I arrived, the shipping container terminal at dawn was already a hive of activity. despite the nascent light. Towering steel boxes, painted in a patchwork of rust and faded corporate logos, loomed like colossal dominoes stacked precariously against a bruised sky. The air was thick with the tang of salt, diesel, and something else, the metallic tang of fear, and the acrid scent of disruption. Blue and red lights pulsed silently, painting the cold metal containers in an eerie, shifting kaleidoscope. Uniformed officers moved with a practiced, somber efficiency, their breaths pluming in the crisp air. Yellow tape, a garish ribbon of warning, cordoned off a wide perimeter, separating the living from the irrevocably departed. The lead detective spotted me, a grim nod his only greeting. His gaze was tired, weighted by the enormity of the task. He pointed towards the heart of the cordoned-off area, where a white sheet, stark against the grimy concrete, marked the final resting place of Elias Thorne. I stepped under the tape, a trespasser in my own past. The rhythmic whir of a distant generator was the only sound that dared to challenge the heavy quiet around the body. As I approached, the scene solidified into stark, unsettling detail. The sheet was lifted by a forensic technician, revealing the tech magnate. Thorne lay on his back, eyes wide, staring at the paling sky, a silent accusation. No defensive wounds, just a sudden, definitive end. My gaze swept the immediate vicinity, a habit ingrained too deeply to ever truly shed. The ground was damp, slick with dew, but remarkably clean. No spent casings glinted in the emerging light. No drag marks, no discarded weapon. The concrete, usually scarred by heavy machinery, seemed almost undisturbed. Too clean. It was the kind of clean that screamed of meticulous planning, of a perpetrator who understood the art of leaving no trace. The only anomaly, a tiny glint near Thorne's outstretched hand, was a shard of something iridescent, almost like a piece of broken glass but with a strange, almost organic sheen. It wasn't reflecting the dawn, it seemed to hold its own faint, internal luminescence. I knelt, my fingers hovering, a silent question forming in my mind. This was no random hit. This was a message. And I, UserRH, was now undeniably a part of its unfolding. The silence of my apartment, usually a bomb, had turned into a suffocating shroud. The click of the phone receiver still echoed in the hollow chambers of my memory, a sharp, metallic sting. My career, shattered like a dropped mirror, still cast jagged reflections. To step back into that arena, even on the periphery, felt like an invitation to bleed anew. But the name he'd uttered, Thorne, resonated with an unsettling power. A low growl of protest escaped me, a sound more akin to a wounded animal than a man. It was a fool's errand, I knew. They would chew me up and spit me out again. Yet the captain's plea, thin as it was, carried an undercurrent of genuine alarm. He believed they were missing something, and he, perhaps foolishly, still believed I was the one to find it. The city's pulse was a low thrum against the tires of my battered sedan, a stark contrast to the quiet hum of my own trepidation. My destination, an unfamiliar dockside, felt like a journey into a different country. When I finally pulled into the makeshift staging area, the first tendrils of dawn were painting the horizon in streaks of bruised violet and faint rose. The shipping container terminal at dawn was a landscape of towering metal giants, stacked in primary blocks against the burgeoning light. Yellow tape, a garish ribbon against the industrial palette, cordoned off a section. Uniformed officers moved with a practiced, somber efficiency, their flashlights carving shifting paths through the gloom. The air thrummed with the low murmur of official voices, the occasional clank of metal, and the distant cry of a gull. I spotted the captain almost immediately, his silhouette a familiar, weary slump beside a patrol cruiser. His eyes, when they met mine, held a flicker of something close to relief, quickly masked by the professional stoicism of his rank. UserRH, shoving my hands into the pockets of my worn jacket. What's the official story? He gestured vaguely towards the cordoned-off area. Thorne, he was found by a night watchman, looks like a robbery, stabbed once clean, no witnesses. A tech CEO, I mused, the words tasting like ash. Dead in a shipping terminal, convenient. That's what I thought, the captain admitted, his gaze sweeping over the scene. But the lead investigator, a young blood named Davies, he's convinced it's an open and shut case. Wants to wrap it up before the media frenzy gets too wild. A uniformed officer, younger than me but with the arrogant swagger of someone who'd never known doubt, approached us. His eyes, sharp and dismissive, lingered on me. "Captain, the forensics team is almost done. We're ready to move the body." "Hold on, officer," the captain interjected, a hand rising. "UserRH here is just observing, a fresh pair of eyes." The young officer, Davies, scoffed, a barely audible puff of air. "With all due respect, Captain, we don't need fresh eyes from a civilian, especially not these eyes." The implication hung heavy, a bitter reminder of my fall from grace. I ignored him, my gaze already fixed on the scene. The wallet's gone, watch too. Standard. Standard for a street mugging, I countered, my eyes narrowing. Not for a man like Thorne at this location at this hour. I walked slowly towards the yellow tape, my mind already sifting through the details. The ground around the body was disturbed, but not excessively. A few footprints, likely from the initial responders. The forensics team, a huddle of figures in white suits, moved methodically. "What do you see, UserRH?" the captain asked, stepping closer, ignoring Davies's audible sigh. "Too clean," I murmured, my gaze sweeping over Thorne's body, then the ground immediately surrounding it. Or rather, too conveniently clean. I knelt, ignoring the captain's warning glance towards Davies, who was now openly glaring. My eyes meticulously scanned the ground, the victim's clothing. The single stab wound was indeed clean, almost surgical in its precision. No defensive wounds on Thorne's hands, which lay open, palms up, as if in surrender or repose. His expensive dress shoes, usually pristine, were scuffed, with a fine, reddish-brown dust that seemed out of place against the gray concrete and rust-stained metal of the terminal. "Dust," I said, more to myself than to them. "This isn't dock dust." Davies stepped forward, his patience clearly worn thin. "It's a shipping terminal, UserRH. Dust is everywhere." "This isn't everywhere dust," I corrected, my voice sharp. "Look closer. It's too uniform, too specific a hue." My eyes drifted from the shoes up the length of Thorne's body, and then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible detail. A faint, jagged tear in the fabric of his left trouser leg just above the knee. It wasn't a rip from a fall or a struggle on the ground. It was a snag, a precise upward gouge, almost as if he'd brushed against something sharp and stationary, something with a very specific angle. And Davies, with his neat, tidy robbery gone wrong theory, had missed it. The case, I knew then, was anything but straightforward. It was already a knot, tightening with every passing moment. The pre-dawn air at the shipping container terminal at dawn tasted of salt and diesel, a metallic tang that pricked at the back of my throat. Monstrous steel boxes, stacked high as cathedrals, loomed in the bruised light, their corrugated flanks weeping rust like ancient wounds. Each container was a silent, monolithic witness to transactions unseen, journeys concluded or perhaps just beginning. My boots crunched on gravel and coarse grit, a sound swallowed by the vast, open space and the distant, rhythmic clang of unseen machinery. I had come here chasing a phantom. The precise hue of the dust on Thorne's shoes, that almost imperceptible tear in his trousers. My mind, a reluctant archive of forgotten details, had conjured images of industrial grit, of metal edges and rough concrete. This place, a sprawling labyrinth of forgotten cargo and hurried movements, felt right. The air here was thick with the same fine, gray particulate that had clung to the CEO's expensive leather. My gaze swept the ground, searching for anomalies in the uniform grime. It was a tedious, almost meditative process. Then a glint, a shard of what looked like safety glass, no bigger than my thumbnail, nestled beside a scuff mark on a concrete barrier. I knelt, my fingers tracing the outline of the abrasion. The tear in Thorne's trousers, I recalled, was jagged, not a clean cut. This rough concrete, the faint metallic sheen on its surface from countless scrapes, could have been the culprit, and the glass. A broken headlight perhaps from a vehicle hastily maneuvering. My deduction solidified. Thorne had been here, not for a casual stroll certainly. The forced nature of his presence, implied by the struggle that tore his expensive fabric, spoke of something clandestine, something violent. Was he meeting someone, or was he brought here unwillingly to be delivered? The thought was a chilling draft down my spine. This wasn't a random mugging, this was deliberate, orchestrated. The specific location, the precision of the dust, the hidden tear, it all whispered of a calculated move, not a desperate one. Or perhaps a disgruntled employee pushed too far. The terminal, a gateway for legal and illicit commerce, offered endless possibilities. It was a beautiful, desolate tableau. I knew my next move had to be Nexus Dynamics, Thorne's kingdom of code and ambition. If he was dragged here, it was likely for something he possessed or something he knew, and that something would undoubtedly be hidden within the digital sinews of his company. Accessing Nexus Dynamics was not a task for the faint of heart, nor for those who still respected legal boundaries. My reputation, already a tattered flag, allowed for certain liberties. I spent the next few days in the periphery of their digital domain, a ghost in the machine's echo chamber. I navigated a labyrinth of firewalls and proxies, sifting through the digital detritus of a company that prided itself on impenetrable security. My fingers danced across the keyboard, a familiar rhythm of concentration and frustration. They spoke in veiled terms of the project, of Aegis, and of Thorne's increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to his death. Too much power. One message read, quickly deleted but not before my system cached it. Ethical lines, gone. Another spoke of unprecedented data harvesting and the potential for absolute control. It was an old contact, a former colleague now working as a system administrator for a rival tech firm who provided the crucial breadcrumb. He owed me a favor, a long-forgotten debt from a case that had nearly broken him. His virtual presence shimmered on my screen, a wary avatar. Thorne was obsessed with something called Project Aegis. The contact typed, his words appearing in a secure chat window, his digital signature untraceable. It was, beyond anything I've ever seen, encrypted to hell. He kept it off Nexus servers mostly, a private network, a ghost in the system. My contact then sent a string of numbers, a fragmented IP address before vanishing from the network. I probed its defenses, a delicate dance of digital subterfuge. Then a flicker. A single encrypted data packet larger than anything I had encountered seemed to pulse at the edge of my access. It was too well guarded, a digital fortress around a single, massive key. As I attempted to force a breach, a different kind of signal erupted. Not a firewall, not a counter-hack, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in my own system's environment. A phantom process, running in the background, mirroring my every keystroke. My screen flickered, not a glitch, but a deliberate, almost taunting intrusion. The air in my cramped office grew heavy, charged with an invisible presence. This wasn't a disgruntled employee's warning. They knew my name. They knew I was digging. The controversial Project Aegis was not merely a corporate secret. It was a guarded truth, and I had just announced my arrival at its gates. The game, I realized, had just begun. The unseen hand whose touch I had felt in the stale air of my office pulled me through the city's veins, a puppet on a string I hadn't yet identified. The CEO's corporate tower, usually a beacon of glass and ambition, now seemed a tombstone, its secrets buried deep within its polished floors. I started not with the obvious but with the whispers, the currents of resentment that flow beneath every empire. A few calls, a carefully placed question to an old contact who trafficked in secrets and corporate gossip, and a name began to surface. The executive, a man whose ambition was a raw, exposed nerve, a senior vice president who had recently lost a power struggle with the deceased CEO. My days blurred into a mosaic of digital forensics and shadowed surveillance. I watched the executive's routine, a clockwork life that betrayed no outward strain, yet the meticulousness felt like a facade. I burrowed into financial records, into the digital footprint of a man whose wealth was considerable, but whose recent investments showed a desperate, ill-advised gamble. It was a classic motive: avarice and the crushing weight of a failing venture, threatening to expose a lifetime of carefully constructed respectability. The compelling evidence materialized in the form of a ledger, not a physical book, but a series of cryptic entries in a secure, encrypted cloud server, a digital dead drop. It detailed payments coded as project overheads, but the dates aligned too perfectly with the CEO's movements, with the hiring of certain transient individuals, with the acquisition of specific untraceable items. It wasn't a smoking gun, but a detailed blueprint for an elaborate, if clumsy, cover-up. The executive's signature, digital but undeniable, was appended to each entry. It felt too easy, yet undeniably solid. This was the work of an amateur trying to appear professional, a man out of his depth. I set the meeting, a calculated risk, a direct challenge. The executive agreed, his voice a tight wire, choosing a location that spoke of finality and anonymity. It was at the shipping container terminal at dawn. The air hung heavy with the smell of brine and diesel, a metallic tang that bit at the back of my throat. The massive cranes, skeletal giants, stood motionless against the bruised purple of the pre-dawn sky, their cables glinting faintly. It was a landscape of transit and anonymity, a perfect stage for a confession or a confrontation. He stood before me, a man stripped bare, the weight of his unraveling evident in every line of his body. I laid out the evidence, not with accusation, but with a quiet certainty. I described the ledger entries, the coded payments, the financial desperation. The details were precise, undeniable. His composure cracked like an ice sheet under immense pressure. He didn't scream, didn't deny with outrage. He was going to expose me. Everything, my family. It would have been ruined. He admitted to hiring a disposable hand, to orchestrating the circumstances, to covering his tracks with the clumsy ledger. He didn't explicitly say the words, "I killed him," but the implication, the raw admission of guilt for the act of having someone else do it, hung heavy in the cold air. The case, the high-profile murder, seemed to have found its architect. The weight that had pressed down on me for weeks, the ghost of my past case, momentarily lifted. This was clean. This was simple, or so I thought. Then, as the first sliver of sun painted the eastern sky in hues of orange and rose, illuminating the executive's pale, defeated face, he added, almost as an afterthought, "They told me it would be clean. They promised no one would ever trace it back, that they would handle everything else." He stressed "they" with an almost imperceptible emphasis, a slight widening of his eyes as he glanced beyond me towards the labyrinth of containers. I just needed him gone. The rest was their problem. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. They, not just an accomplice, but a network. He was not the orchestrator, but a desperate man caught in a larger web. The ledger, the meticulously placed evidence, the clear-cut motive, it all clicked into place, but not in the way I had initially believed. It was too clean, too simple. This wasn't the work of an amateur. It was the work of a professional framing an amateur, leaving just enough breadcrumbs to lead a determined investigator to the chosen scapegoat. The unseen adversary hadn't just confirmed their presence. They had laid a trap, and I had walked right into it, a willing participant in their grand deception. The executive was a pawn, a sacrificial lamb offered to appease the hungry wolves of public scrutiny. Political figures, perhaps, the kind of power that could erase inconvenient truths and sacrifice lesser men without a second thought. The scent of damp concrete, the metallic tang, suddenly transported me. Another time, another case. The same feeling of being outmaneuvered, of the game being rigged, of powerful hands reaching down from untouchable heights to crush those who dared to interfere. A suffocating tightness gripped my chest, a phantom limb of my past trauma flexing its cruel muscles. The faces of the innocent, the ones I couldn't save, flickered behind my eyes. My breath hitched. I had been so close, so sure. But this was no victory. The fight had only just begun, and my own demons were already gathering, eager to see me fall. The revelation, a jagged shard of truth, had carved itself into my mind. They, a collective shadow, not a solitary villain. The ledger, the staged murder, the convenient motive, all threads woven by unseen hands, pulling the strings of a desperate man. Thorne was a pawn, a sacrifice. And I, UserRH, had nearly been another. My world, already fractured, now felt like a mosaic shattering into 1,000 glittering, dangerous pieces. Sleep offered no solace, only a relentless reel of faces, whispers, and the ghost of a past I thought buried. If a network existed, it left traces, and I knew where to look. The world was still clinging to the last vestiges of night when my vehicle rumbled towards the shipping container terminal at dawn. The air, thick with the scent of salt and diesel, bit at my exposed skin. Towering monoliths of rust-colored steel, stacked precariously high, formed a labyrinth against the bruised purple sky. Cranes, skeletal giants, loomed silent and still, their long necks bent in slumber. I moved like a wraith through the narrow canyons between containers, my senses heightened, a predator stalking its own hunters. My contact, a nervous dock worker I'd cultivated during my policing days, had left a cryptic message. Box 713 under the seal. Dawn. He had seen something, he claimed, something moved late, something not on the manifest. I reached the designated container, its corrugated sides scarred by years of brutal weather. My fingers, practiced and quick, found the loose seam near the bottom, a small waterproof pouch. Inside, a thumb drive and a crumpled note, *Thorne's private server logs, not the wind, not a stray animal. My hand instinctively went to the familiar weight at my hip. They were indeed watching. They had been waiting, lean and swift, emerged. Another, broader, followed. No words, just the silent, predatory advance. My heart, a drum against my ribs, wasn't pounding in fear but in recognition. This wasn't a random mugging, it was a cleanup operation, and I was the mess. I didn't hesitate. Spinning, I launched myself into the narrow gap between containers, the metal groaning as I scraped past. A sharp bark of command, then the thud of heavy boots on asphalt. They were faster than I anticipated. It also illuminated the glint of metal in the hand of one of my pursuers, not a knife, but something more serious, something with a report that would shatter the dawn. I ducked behind a stack of containers, the metallic clang of a dropped object echoing behind me. They were closing in. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. My old contact, the one who'd pulled me into this, couldn't shield me now. I was exposed, a lone wolf in a pack's hunting ground. Completely. No more half measures, no more playing by rules that no longer applied. I knew a kindred spirit, a truth seeker named Alara, an investigative journalist whose reputation for unearthing corporate rot was legendary. My burner phone, a relic I kept for emergencies, vibrated in my hand. His voice, crisp and low, answered on the second ring. UserRH, he said, no preamble. Heard I've been busy. Busier than I'd like. And now I'm a target. I recounted the terminal encounter, the thumb drive, the note. Thorne was working on something. Project Chimera. Does that mean anything to I? A pause, heavy with thought, then a sharp intake of breath. Chimera. I've been sniffing around that name for months. Ghost stories mostly. I thought it was just a code name for some new AI, but I couldn't get a hook. I think it's more than that. I think it's the key to Thorne's murder and something else. Something from my past. The words felt heavy, the confession a bitter pill. Meet me, my old place. My derelict office, a testament to my fallen status, offered little comfort, but it was secure. I handed her the thumb drive. Her fingers, nimble and quick, worked at the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, a language I once understood but had since forgotten. These aren't just server logs, Alara murmured, her eyes wide with a sudden horror. This is architecture, a blueprint. Project Chimera is a deep learning algorithm, UserRH, designed for predictive behavioral analysis, but not for market trends, for influence, for manipulation. She clicked through folders, revealing schematics, data flow diagrams, and then a series of experimental trial runs. My breath hitched. The dates, the locations, the parameters, the one that spiraled out of control. The one they blamed on a rogue agitator. The one I was investigating. Alara looked up, his face pale. It looks like a simulation, UserRH, a controlled experiment in escalating chaos. The targets, the messaging, the timing, all orchestrated, and look at the projected outcome if it had gone to full scale. Complete systemic breakdown. The connection slammed into me, a physical blow. The case that had destroyed my career, smeared my name, branded me incompetent. It wasn't a failure of mine. It was a test. A horrifying, meticulously planned test for Project Chimera. They hadn't just used Thorne, they had used me, and for what he threatened to expose. My past wasn't just haunting me, it was actively reaching out, its tendrils wrapped around the present, threatening to strangle the future. The stakes had just become immeasurably higher. This wasn't just about a murdered CEO. Alara met my gaze, a silent understanding passing between us. We were in this together now, two renegades against a ghost. The biting wind, sharp with the tang of salt and diesel, scoured the shipping container terminal at dawn. Skeletal cranes, monstrous silent sentinels, pierced the bruised canvas of the sky. Around us, a labyrinth of steel leviathans, stacked high, cast long, distorted shadows that writhed and shortened with the advancing light. Each creak of metal, each distant groan of a ship docking, was a false alarm, a drumbeat against my ribs. Almost there, the programmer muttered, hunched over their glowing screen, fingers a blur across the keys. Their breath plumed in the frigid air, a ghost of their focus. The laptop, a beacon in the gloom, cast a blue pallor on their face, highlighting the strain etched around their eyes. The air thrummed with unspoken urgency, a fragile bubble of concentration amidst the vast, indifferent industrial landscape. My gaze swept the desolate expanse, searching the gaps between the towering containers, scanning the murky waters of the channel. The silence was a deception, a thin veneer over the hum of unseen threats. My hand instinctively sought the cold comfort of the pistol holstered beneath my jacket, a familiar weight against my side. The previous chapter's revelation, that crushing blow of understanding, still reverberated through me. My career wasn't just ended, it was sacrificed, a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. They had used me. They had used Thorne. Patience was a luxury I could no longer afford. Every ticking second felt like a grain of sand slipping through an hourglass, bringing us closer to either salvation or ruin. The encryption layers are intricate, like a spiderweb spun from pure paranoia. The programmer replied, their brow furrowed. But I'm stripping them back one by agonizing one. This Thorne, he was good or terrified, or both. The screen flickered, a cascade of raw data scrolling, then coalescing into a more coherent form. The Cabal, a global control network, not just data, not just surveillance. It's designed to manipulate markets, influence elections, even orchestrate social unrest. The scale of their ambition, the sheer audacity of their machinations was breathtakingly vile. Thorne hadn't just been an accomplice, he'd been a cog and perhaps a reluctant one trying to leave breadcrumbs. My disgrace, my shattered reputation, was merely collateral damage in their grand design. They hadn't just taken my badge, they had tried to take my very belief in justice. These names, I pointed to a list that now filled a significant portion of the screen. They are the core, the architects. We need this, all of it. The evidence, raw and unvarnished, was a weapon forged in the crucible of Thorne's fear and the programmer's skill. But merely possessing it wasn't enough. I needed to deliver it, and that meant walking into the dragon's maw. It's downloaded, encrypted again to a flash drive, the programmer confirmed, pulling a small metallic rectangle from a USB port. But they'll know we have it, or they'll know Thorne's cache was breached. A low rumble echoed from the far end of the terminal, deeper than a ship's engine, more deliberate than a container being shifted. My head snapped up. A black sedan, its windows tinted, moved with an unnerving grace between two rows of stacked steel. It was too early for dock workers, too out of place for casual traffic. They were here. "We move," I commanded, my voice devoid of tremor, a stark contrast to the tremors that had once shaken my world. Now, my mind raced, charting a desperate course. I couldn't go to the authorities, the corruption ran too deep. Not yet. I needed an intermediary, someone who operated outside the lines, someone with enough leverage and enough moral ambiguity to understand the danger and still act. There was only one option, a contact I had sworn I would never call again, a ghost from my past whose very existence was a risk. Leveraging him would burn any chance of a quiet life, extinguish the last ember of normalcy. But the stakes were too high, global control. My city, my world, twisted by unseen hands. There was no choice. I pulled out my burner phone, its screen a dim rectangle in my palm, and punched in a number I had thought long erased from my memory. The line rang twice, then a gruff, familiar voice answered, laced with a sleep-addled suspicion. "It's UserRH," I said, my gaze locked on the approaching sedan, now a little closer, its movements precise, predatory. "I have something that changes everything, and I need it delivered to the right hands without touching my own." A beat of silence stretched, heavy with the weight of our shared, complicated history. Then the voice, now sharper, clearer. "Where?" "The old abandoned factory on the waterfront, the east entrance." 1 hour, I stated, knowing the risk I was asking, the danger I was inviting. "Come alone." I snapped the phone shut, the decision made, the die cast. The sedan was closer still, its headlights now visible, 2 piercing eyes in the gloom. I gripped the programmer's arm. "Run. Follow me. Don't look back." The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of impending storm and the metallic tang of danger. The shipping container terminal, once a symbol of commerce, had become a battleground, and dawn, not a promise of light, but a harbinger of the hunt. I had the evidence, a searing truth, but the path to expose it was a gauntlet, and I was being hunted. The real fight had just begun. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of impending storm and the metallic tang of danger. The shipping container terminal at dawn, once a symbol of commerce, had become a battleground, and dawn, not a promise of light, but a harbinger of the hunt. My fingers, numb with cold and anticipation, clutched the small, unassuming data drive, a digital heart holding the conspiracy's darkest secrets. The path ahead was a maze of steel giants, stacked high, their shadows stretching like grasping claws in the nascent light. My breath plumed in the frigid air as I moved, a phantom amidst the dormant cranes and silent freight. The terminal sprawled, a sprawling industrial beast, its arteries of rail lines and roadways leading to a central, fortified office block I knew housed the network hub. That was my target. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a figure, silhouetted against the paling sky, patrolling the perimeter of the target building. Not just one, I realized, as a second form emerged from behind a towering stack of cobalt blue. 2 security operatives, their uniforms crisp, their weapons slung with casual menace. My mind raced, piecing together the angles, the blind spots, the brief windows of opportunity. This wasn't about brute force. It was about the ghost of a detective, fading into the industrial gray. The scent of diesel and salt filled my nostrils, a harsh perfume for this deadly ballet. I scaled a low stack, my muscles protesting the strain, then dropped into the narrow gap between 2 colossal green boxes, the impact jarring my teeth. The metallic clang of my boot echoed too loudly in the pre-dawn quiet, and I froze, listening. A moment of held breath, then the distant, rhythmic crunch of gravel as the patrols continued, oblivious. Lucky, or perhaps merely overlooked. Reaching the building's service entrance, I found the lock a formidable beast of hardened steel. No simple pick would suffice. My gaze swept the area, landing on a discarded crowbar near a maintenance shed. A moment of decision, then a swift dash, the tool's weight reassuring in my hand. With a grunt and a focused surge of old anger, I pried at the frame, the metal groaning in protest. The shriek of tortured steel tore through the quiet, a siren's wail. I pushed harder, sweat beading on my brow until the hinges buckled with a final, protesting snap. Inside, the air was warmer, stale, smelling of old coffee and ozone. I moved through a deserted reception, then up a flight of stairs, my feet light on the worn industrial carpet. The server room, I knew from my hurried intel, was on the 3rd floor, its door reinforced, its access restricted. As I reached the landing, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Going somewhere, UserRH." The voice was low, gravelly, and disturbingly familiar. I spun, crowbar still in hand, to face the enforcer, a mountain of a man who had haunted the periphery of my previous investigation. His eyes, devoid of mercy, glinted in the dim light. He lunged, a blur of muscle and intent. I ducked, the crowbar swinging wide, catching him across the ribs with a sickening thud. He grunted, stumbling back, but quickly recovered, a snarl twisting his lips. This was no street brawl. This was a dance of desperation. He threw a punch that would have shattered my jaw, but I twisted, letting the momentum carry me past him, aiming for the server room door. "You won't get through," he bellowed, recovering quickly, blocking my path. "Watch me," I retorted, adrenaline singing in my veins. We circled the crowbar, a clumsy extension of my will. I feigned a low strike, then brought it up, aiming for his head. He blocked it with a forearm, but the force of the blow staggered him. That was my chance. I slammed my shoulder into the reinforced door, testing its strength, then kicked out at the enforcer's knee. He roared, dropping to one knee, momentarily incapacitated. With a final, desperate shove, I forced the server room door open, slipping inside. The hum of machines filled the air, a metallic symphony of data. I located the main terminal, its screen glowing with lines of code. The data drive felt like a burning coal in my palm. My fingers flew, connecting it to the port, initiating the upload. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the emergency light, was the handler, my old contact, the one who had pulled me into this, the one I had trusted. I was the perfect pawn, UserRH, disgraced, desperate for redemption, so easy to manipulate. The reveal hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just corporate espionage. It was a deeper game, a betrayal from within my own supposed alliance. My contact hadn't wanted the truth exposed, only their version of it. I had been a tool to destabilize a rival faction within the grander scheme, not to dismantle the entire corrupt structure. The full truth is far too inconvenient. The upload progress bar was at 70%, not enough. I couldn't let it be for nothing. "You won't stop it," I growled, my voice raw. The handler raised the pistol, aiming for the terminal. "Oh, I think I will." A desperate surge of adrenaline propelled me forward. I tackled the handler, knocking the pistol wide, sending it skittering across the floor. My head slammed against a server rack, stars exploding behind my eyes, but I held on, clawing for the fallen weapon for any advantage. The enforcer moved, a silent, deadly force. I knew I couldn't fight them both. My gaze flickered to the screen, 95%, almost there. With a final, desperate lunge, I pushed the handler hard against a console, then spun, grabbing a heavy network cable. As the enforcer closed in, I swung it, catching him across the face, buying precious seconds. My eyes locked on the screen. 98%, 99%. The handler, now on their feet, plunged the knife towards my side. I felt a searing pain, a hot, wet rush as the blade found its mark, but my fingers, slick with sweat and blood, slammed down on the transmit key. A triumphant chime echoed through the room. Upload complete. The world tilted. The enforcer roared, grabbing me, but I was already falling, the pain a white-hot nova. My vision blurred. I had done it. The data was out. The truth, raw and unvarnished, was now beyond their reach. The personal cost was immediate, visceral. I lay on the cold floor, the hum of the servers a fading drone, the dawn outside still breaking, but for me, a different kind of darkness had descended. I had exposed their lies, but I was left bleeding, my name still stained, my soul scarred anew. The world tilted. The handler cursed, pulling the knife free, leaving a burning void in my flank. My vision blurred, a crimson haze bleeding into the concrete floor. I had done it. The data was out. Then a cacophony of distant sirens blossomed, growing into an urgent shriek. Footsteps pounded, not theirs, but many. The enforcer, a shadow against the pulsing red, released me, cursing a guttural oath. My last conscious thought was the metallic tang of fear in the air, not my own, but theirs. I awoke to the rhythmic clank of metal against metal, a mournful dirge carried on a stiff breeze. My body was a landscape of ache, a tapestry woven with raw nerves and throbbing wounds. A dull throb pulsed in my side, a constant companion. My eyes, crusted and heavy, fluttered open. Above me, the skeletal cranes of the shipping container terminal at dawn clawed at a bruised sky, their massive forms silhouetted against the nascent light. I lay on a cot, a rough blanket pulled to my chin. My clothes were gone, replaced by a loose gown, and my left side was swathed in bandages, tight and clean. The world was still muted, but the edges were sharpening. A figure sat nearby, hunched on an overturned barrel, watching the horizon. It was the old contact, their face etched with a weary satisfaction I hadn't seen in years. "You're a stubborn ghost." A sharp jolt of pain reminding me of my new limitations. A grunt escaped me. The contact turned, a faint smile playing on their lips. The data sang UserRH, a full-throated area across every major network, the handler, the enforcer. They didn't even make it out of the warehouse, caught red-handed trying to destroy evidence. The digital trail I left was a roadmap to damnation. My breath hitched, a fragile victory blossoming in my chest. And the others, the network, unraveling like a cheap sweater in a storm. The contact's gaze drifted back to the dawn, where the first rays of sun painted the steel containers in hues of rust and gold. The CEO's murder was just the first domino. It was deeper than we imagined. High-profile arrests across the city, even some national figures are implicated. The public outcry is immense. The foundations are shaking, UserRH, truly shaking. A strange lightness settled over me, a feeling akin to shedding a heavy cloak. The name, UserRH, once synonymous with failure, now carried the faint echo of a different tune. My name. I started, my voice weak. The contact met my gaze, their eyes holding a complex mix of respect and sorrow. Partially cleared, the official narrative is convoluted. I read a key witness, a confidential informant who risked everything, the old charges, the disgrace. They're being re-examined. There will be no public apology, no parade. The old contact, the one who tried to warn me, they were already working to untangle the web from within. They were broken now, their carefully constructed world shattered by a single desperate act. The thought brought no joy, only a profound weariness. The cost had been immense. My body scarred, my spirit irrevocably altered. The cynicism that had been my shield for so long now felt like a second skin, worn thin in places but still stubbornly clinging. "What now?" I asked, the question hanging in the vast, open space of the terminal. The cranes above seemed to hold their breath, waiting for an answer I didn't possess. The contact finally stood, stretching, their joints popping. "Now you heal, and then. The city still breathes, UserRH, and where there's breath, there's rot. The fight isn't over. This battle, yes, it's won, but justice is a hydra. The quiet war continues." I understood. My name might carry a different weight now, a faint glimmer of redemption, but the scars were real. The world was not suddenly clean, nor was my soul suddenly whole. I was UserRH, a ghost who had walked through fire and emerged not unburnt but unbowed. The horizon, stretching endlessly beyond the steel behemoths, was an uncertain canvas. My journey, fractured and perilous, was far from over.